biology, species, human development, and population patterns within the Potomac River watershed in the United States. This is a line. It denotes the boundary between Turkey and Syria. And if there are any other bird nerds in the audience, you might recognize these. These are migratory flyways of the world. A map is one of the most powerful tools that we have for understanding our world and creating blueprints to change it. Maps guide decisions, inform governance, businesses, NGOs, and for the first time in history, Goodlands, my organization, sent out to look at the world in an entirely new way, a geo-religious perspective. In 2016, we completed the first comprehensive global maps of the Catholic Church in history, and we also created a massive baseline of properties throughout the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Since completing them, we've done many more mapping projects, illuminating Catholic communications infrastructure across Africa, healthcare, globally, and even orphan care recently. And to familiarize yourself with the Catholic Church, if this isn't the language you speak, there are different administrative boundaries, kind of like countries. So the admin 1 of the church is called Episcopal Conferences, and this is a map of that. Admin 2 is provinces, and admin 3 are what I refer to as dioceses, but there are many different types of these, such as apostolic vicariates, archdioceses, et cetera. When you look back at history, I think it's hard to argue that two things have influenced our development of civilization more than land and religion. These are also two things that have caused a lot of conflicts, so they're a super high leverage point. But how does this apply to climate change, and why does it matter to us today? Why does it matter to the SDGs? Well, about 43% of the Earth's surface is habitable. And Iyad Abu Mogli of the United Nations Faith for Earth Initiative says that about 8% of that land is owned by faith-based organizations. 5% of commercial forests are also overseen by these organizations. Considering this, we really can't tackle climate change or even achieve the SDGs without faith-based actors as part of the conversation. And that amount is close to the entire amount of land it's actually a bit more than India and Sudan combined. A little bit about my faith family to give you an idea of this network. There are 1.2 billion Catholics in the world today, or approximately 16% of the global population. Like most families, we're a little bit dysfunctionally functional, but we do a lot of good. The Catholic healthcare system is the largest provider of healthcare, serving over 26% of healthcare facilities globally. There's a ton of students under Catholic education, over 54 million, and Catholic humanitarian aid as a network comprises the largest network of aid unless you include the United Nations. And of course, given this, these networks combine into a very large network of land. This is properties within the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And when I was in graduate school, I naively thought, oh, how wonderful, they must have the largest network of conservation. I'll go work for that. And I looked and I found that actually no one was helping the church even manage its land or understand what it had. And this was a tremendous issue. And I knew that a good way to scale our programs would be to map not only dioceses, but also the individual properties and contextualize them through a classification system of ecclesiastical jurisdictions globally that allowed us to reapply models that work well. So I went to the Vatican when I was 26, and I said, do you guys mind if I borrow this map? And there hadn't really been an update since the Holy Roman Empire, so we had to do that from scratch. And I worked with a team that did the United Nations boundaries to develop these. And we premiered them in this building downstairs in 2016 as part of the Vatican Arts and Technology Council. And since then, I'm renegotiating a contract to hopefully bring a cartography institute, at least on a trial basis, to the Vatican. And it would be the first scientific institute here, actually practicing science, since the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Observatory was founded to create the Gregorian calendar we use today. And I do hope it will be the first female-founded scientific institute in the Vatican. What we do is very simple at Goodlands. We just help communities plan their land, which you can't do without maps. This is an example of USCCB properties and their impact on habitat connectivity and green infrastructure. So we measured how every single property in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is contributing to habitat connectivity. But that data is really valuable for a lot of different things like pastoral planning, education programs. So we stand up data systems that allow dioceses and religious communities to actually leverage that for a variety of their goals. That baseline property record digitization that we do for religious communities, if we did that alone and walked away, that would be tremendously powerful. It can allow these communities to collateralize their assets to pay. It can even help people in the area obtain personhood status if they don't have any documentation connected with Catholic properties. So our work is simple, and our impact and our goal is to make land work for good, but we multiply that impact through our data systems development by helping different communities leverage all of that data we have to generate for environmental programs for a variety of goals. If we did that, the data development alone, it has the potential to completely transform Catholic refugee relief, Catholic healthcare, and education. And given the scope of these networks globally, it has the role to play a very significant part in moving forward the SDGs. Further, with ESRI, we are sharing over $1 billion worth of technology to all Catholic schools for free so that they can actually start to work with our data and spread our kind of approach and gain education about their faith and technology. How we're going to do this, so this launch is about to happen, is with our data, we can automatically email and address every single bishop for over 2,440 of approximately 2,800 dioceses in the appropriate languages. And that will be happening towards the end of this synod, in addition to sharing different maps affiliated with the synod. How it's accessible is we're launching this GeoHub, which is soft launched right now, so you can actually access it. In it are over 200 maps exploring the Catholic Church around the world. Things such as the ordinary by their type, or Catholic orphanages, which I mentioned will be up there once our partners give us permission. We created this by making software to scrape the Annuarium Statisticum Ecclesiae, so a lot of this is actually coming out of Vatican data. Looking at biodiversity in every diocese in the world, we can see where the Catholic Church is not just a necessary, but the most powerful non-state actor for addressing these problems. And further, we're excited to launch the Global Catholic Carbon Footprint. It's the first time any major world religion has had a carbon footprint and will allow Catholic communities to align themselves with the Paris Accord. And then also, of course, showing the consequences of not doing that, where people will be facing deadly heat. So maps really have the power to change the world, and they are necessary for engaging all actors in addressing the SDGs. And as you saw, faith-based actors are a key player within this. There was a scientist in England, his name is slipping my head right now, but he once said that faith and science are opposed to each other like my thumb and my forefinger. Between them, I can grasp all things. And I truly believe that cartography and advancements in digital science will help us transform the world and measure, track, and implement the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly, for the wonderful work that you've been doing. And it was actually the first time I've seen that presentation. It was just fantastic, very technical. And it's no surprise that you received that wonderful award because of the due diligence and the extreme attention to detail, but also the inspirational work that you do. So continue to make us proud. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is another alumni of the Vatican Youth Symposium, Mariana Ruenes, who has been doing wonderful work with the Sin Trata organization and has been making a daily impact in her life by really changing the landscape in her country on human trafficking. Mariana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to be talking about human trafficking and modern-day slavery. It's what we call it now. So every day there are 4.3 million people that are being subject either to labor exploitation or sex exploitation. And it's important to call them modern slaves because if we don't learn to add the temporality of the type of slavery that we're living, it's going to be really hard to identify of whom we're talking about. And our expectations of where we might find them will change. So talking about how a modern slave will look like is important, but it's also important to identify how modern slavery is happening, when it's happening, and by whom. Who is being directly or indirectly involved in the process, knowing or not knowing that they're being involved in the process. And what's surprising is that from those 40 million people that are being forced into modern slavery, only 1% of them are actually identified and actually receive access to justice. And this 1% is not only true for my country, Mexico, it's also true for the whole world. Sometimes it depends on the estimation, we will not even reach that 1% being identified of victims. Now, it's actually not that hard to identify victims. We've often and recently, just this year, found victims in busy streets, in the internet, while reaping apples in the border with the US, or while crossing a border, while migrating. And these are just some of these examples. And our guess is that some of the reasons we've not been able to identify these victims and to successfully get them to justice, give them access to justice, is because one, perhaps we're not even looking for them. Two is we're not asking the right questions to be able to identify the logistics of how modern slavery is actually happening. And we might not be very efficient telling those people that may be key actors the small responses, the information, the data that we actually have about human trafficking. For example, I don't know if you knew, but 80% of the victims that are crossing borders are going through official checkpoints undetected. This means that victims are being moved around in international airports, in bus terminals, and that we've not been able to notice them. And also let me tell you that every week, we're an NGO, and every week in Mexico City, in our geographic location, we get more than 5 or 6 cases of missing minors all the time, families looking for children that have been contacted and extracted through social media. And did you also know that, and this is a discovery, I would think that it would be really obvious, but for us it's definitely a discovery, is that human trafficking actually utilizes the structure of cities. The infrastructure that we use, it's the same that human trafficking actually utilizes. So, for example, in the tourism sector, I'm going to give the Mexican Caribbean as a huge example. The Mexican Caribbean is well known for being a hotspot for trafficking, sex trafficking in children, and it uses our hotel and motel structure, taxi networks to offer the services, to surveil and control victims. Trafficking is using bank services. They're using social media. They're using all of the same structure that we use. They travel like we travel. And this should give us an insight of some of the solutions that we can push forward to actually interrupt the logistics from happening, interrupt the logistics of human trafficking. And some things we've been wondering, and we were just telling to ourselves, what if we could actually use modern tools to combat a modern crime that's actually structured like a business? What if we could make that business harder? What if we could make it imposibilitarlo, like we would say in Spanish? Make it harder and harder for victims to be moved around in our cities, for children to be exploited in Tulum, in Cancun, that you must have visited probably. And the thing is that today it's easy for that to happen. And it's possible, and we've already started doing certain agreements that have been very strategic and that have started to have an impact. Sin Trata, the organization that I founded and preside, is a non-governmental institution, organization, and we have 8 years of experience. And in these 8 years, we've literally experimented many things. And just this, in 2018, we started collecting information and started to try to systematize information. And in 2018 as well, we had our first technological partnership with a tech giant that is Uber in Mexico. And we realized, so what would the potential for a business like Uber be in the equation of human trafficking? And we realized that, for example, Uber in Mexico has more than 250,000 drivers that are everywhere in the city. It's literally having those many eyes in every corner from morning to evening. And we realized, what if we give them very specific information? If we know actually how human trafficking works, and we can get very specific indicators, then we can give those to key citizens, in this case, drivers, that will be able to identify. And this model has actually scaled. I'm really proud to celebrate with you that this model has actually been scaled and implemented in other countries in Latin America, even in Canada and in the US, a model that was developed by a small NGO that started collecting data on human trafficking. And also, I want to share with you that we'll be having the first results on victims being identified by drivers and operatives taking place. So victims being rescued actually by the information that we're handling today. So what we're doing today is focusing on understanding exactly how, when, and where the logistics of human trafficking is actually taking place, and being able to have a proper conversation with those who are in a key position, key sectors like the tourism, tech, transport sectors, for them to do the right thing, for us together to be able to actually design cities where human trafficking is harder and harder. Thank you so much for this opportunity.